What's the most awkward thing you've seen go down at a wedding? Went to a wedding last year of a girl I went to university with. She's super Christian, which is not a bad thing, but it's important to the story. The bride was 24, the groom was 41. Big age gap, but mentally the groom was like 19. They'd known each other for about a year at this point, got engaged after 4 months of dating, and said they would get married the following year in November. They got married in December the same year that they met, after about a year of knowing each other. The bride is white and comes from a Christian household. The groom is Asian, originally from Malaysia. The family is also super conservative or Christian. Groom's dad is loaded, has screw you amounts of money, solitaire member on Singapore Airlines, has houses across Asia and Oceania, doesn't live anywhere for more than 185 days to avoid paying taxes. Super Christian, but has no problems dodging taxes. Anyway, the wedding comes around. It's a super nice, super expensive wedding. Myself and my girlfriend are the only attendees who aren't family or church members from the couple's churches. There's a bar at the wedding. However, if you want any alcohol, you have to pay for it yourself, because alcohol is a sin or some stuff like that. Speaking to the bride before the wedding, she's voiced her concerns about this guy before and how she isn't sure if she loves him, but she can learn to love him. She told me at the wedding that it was the groom's mother's wish for her son to get married before she passed away. After the ceremony, the parents of the bride and groom both give speeches saying how happy they are, how happy the late mother would be for her son to be getting married, how they're looking forward to getting grandchildren soon, quoting some Bible passage saying to go forth and prosper and be fruitful or something. The groom's best man gave a speech basically saying how he hopes the bride isn't barren for the groom or groom's late mother's sake. Good times. Now that they're married for a year, they bought an apartment in a building that still needs to be built, as in the building company needs to sell X amount of apartments before they commence building. They signed a contract to buy a one-bedroom place for $350,000, kangaroo dollars, in a suburb or satellite CBD. Housing prices have fallen about 10% since they signed that contract. The father of the groom gave them some cash to open a cafe. It's in the CBD, but not in a part that receives a lot of foot traffic. So the rent is high, but they don't receive a lot of patrons. They also leave it to other people to operate it. I swing past occasionally. I've never once seen either of them there. I sent the bride a text asking what days she or he works. They go in maybe once a week. The bride has decided to give up getting a job in the field we studied for, in favor of spending more time at home getting to know her husband. She's becoming increasingly difficult to hang out with. If we want to go for brunch, she feels obligated to bring her husband. He gets annoyed if she sees any friends, male or female, without him. He made a bad joke that I'm trying to cut his grass in front of my girlfriend. I asked her if married life is anything like she imagined. She said it's more boring. When I asked what living with her husband was like, she said he's like a child. She does all his cooking, cleaning, washing the clothes, and general running of the household. Story 2. When one of my uncles got married, late at night the evening before the wedding, he got a phone call from his aunt, my great aunt. She and her husband had missed her flight, she said, and the airline couldn't get them on another one in time to make the wedding. She was sorry and wished him the best of luck and all the love in the world. It wasn't until later we learned the truth. She had cancer and was fading fast. She had already outlived the doctor's expectations by over a year, and she was doing well enough that all her doctors had cleared her for this trip. But somehow she knew in her gut that she wouldn't make it through the weekend. She didn't want to pass away at the wedding and ruin that special day or the new couple's honeymoon. So she wrote and mailed the letter, got there before the couple returned, but was of course unopened. Her husband and her sister-in-law, our best friend, knew the truth, but had promised and fulfilled their promise to keep it a secret for a while. R.I.P. Aunt. Damn. Story 3. This was the first wedding I went to, and wow, what a strange wedding to start with. It was a beautiful wedding by the water at sunset. For context, the bride's family or friends are very religious, and the groom's family is the exact opposite. Granted, there were some people who are religious on the groom's side. Anyways, when the pastor or priest starts speaking, he first starts saying, "It's the wife's duty to do everything for her husband. He will own you." Now he goes on about this for a good 5 minutes in detail and even mentions her intimate duties to her husband. Now I'm seated in the groom's side and you hear whispers of outrage and general shock. Even one of my childhood friends' mom, who's normally quiet, was like, "What the heck is this crap?" You can see the groom's face also questioning life, like he was astonished these words were coming out. The bride had the same expression of an awkward, "what the heck is going on?" On the other side of the aisle, no one seemed fazed at all. And the priest goes on saying very cynic stuff until it's time the groom and bride are asked the question, "Will you take blank till rapture do you part?" You start hearing everyone in our section echoing the word rapture, confused as hell. A couple people were full on saying, "Did he just say rapture?" out loud, and every time the word rapture was said, it just got louder and louder. Still, no reaction from the other side. not even reacting to the people repeating rapture about 20 times. We look at the groom's face, and he looks like he really wanted to facepalm but couldn't at that moment. The priest went on and asked the same question to the bride, and he definitely said rapture again and even added an emphasis on the rapture part. Right after that, they walk off to the reception area next door, and I see them immediately grab a beer each and chug it. When they dropped by our table later on, they were pretty much crap-talking the speech to us while they enjoyed another cold beer. I guess their marriage will last longer than passing rapture. Sometimes, I wish other weddings were this crazy or entertaining. Or not. I have no idea what denomination they're part of. Bonus story. The second wedding I went to, I broke up a fight between two cousins, and then an hour later, one cousin tried to fight a friend of the bride, and I broke the fight up too, so he wouldn't get charges. Story 4. It was pre-wedding awkwardness. My best friend from childhood was the oldest of 5. Although we all have moved to different cities, we often get together at her parents' house for a campfire or barbecue when we are visiting family for holidays. The sister closest in age to her was getting married that spring. She wanted to pay for the wedding without the help of either parents, so it was small, a potluck, and held in a state park. I understood when I didn't get an invite. Although I'd known her all her life and we'd been neighbors in college, I'd primarily been her sister's friend. Her groom-to-be, however, did not know this. I was excited to meet him, and as we shook hands, he said, "It's great to meet you. Can't wait to see you at our wedding." There were 3 seconds of awkward silence, and I watched his fiancée make uh-oh faces behind him. I finally said something like, "Thanks, man, and congratulations. I actually am not on your guest list, but I understand. It's a small wedding. I wish you two the best, and I'm sure I'll see you again at one of these get-togethers." He was horrified and felt terrible. After apologizing repeatedly to me, the two of them went inside, where I'm guessing he asked for more info on who would be at their wedding and who didn't make the cut. About 6 weeks later, I got a message saying that someone had RSVP'd. No, and they now had an invite for me and would love for me to attend. Although that barbecue or campfire was awkward as hell, the wedding was awesome, and I'm really glad I was there. Maybe the best wedding I've been to. Totally worth it. Dog, I wouldn't even go. I'm just that petty. Story 5. My own recent wedding. I have a strained relationship with my mother, caused in part by the fact that she decided I was into girls when I was 10 years old and pestered me for years in an attempt to get me to come out to her. I finally outed myself as bi at 15, and she threw a screaming fit over it. When I started college, she became paranoid that I was going to sleep with a woman and turn queer forever. When I got my first boyfriend, she crowed that he'd fixed me, and I had to explain patiently that sleeping with one person of the opposite gender was not going to turn me straight. Just like sleeping with a woman wasn't going to make me want to be with the same gender. I had a female roommate in college, as you do when you're a girl, and we got along so well we continued to live together after leaving the dorm, graduating, etc. When she couldn't go home for the holidays one year, I, of course, invited her to my family's Thanksgiving and Christmas. My mom was absolutely convinced that I was secretly getting with my roommate. Convinced. Even when my 100% straight roommate had a boyfriend, she was pretty sure I was getting with both of them. This went on the entire 5 years I lived with this roommate and continued even after we moved to separate apartments. It only stopped when she finally moved out of state. I got married earlier this year, to a dude, and of course my old roommate was invited as one of my closest friends. Being the gracious soul she is, she decided to speak to my mom and to introduce her fiancé to my family as well. She walked up to my mom, said hello, and my mom completely blanked her. My roommate hasn't changed a whit in the 6 years we've lived apart. Same style, hair color, cut, etc. She looks exactly the same. But after all those years of my mom stalking every photo of us together, searching for clues that we were secretly getting together, she no longer even recognized the woman I lived with for over half a decade. Story 6. One of my closest friends got married a few months ago. I've had asthma since birth, which is mostly under control and I'm used to it. Nevertheless, there are days that are way worse than normal days with this illness. If the weather is changing quickly from hot to cold or rainy, I struggle with it. His wedding was in the morning at 30 degrees Celsius. The celebration started at 5 p.m. at 13 degrees, so we had this massive temperature drop and it went from sunny to rainy. I still went to the celebration and had a few drinks with my friends, but already had a very hard time to get enough oxygen in my system. That's something you feel, especially when you're having asthma your whole life. So I sat down and tried to catch a breath, which didn't help at all. For 2 hours I sat there, struggling to breathe. But I didn't want to crash the party, so I called a close person to come up there and drive me to the hospital. Another 30 minutes passed, and I nearly passed out in the parking lot, fighting for every breath. People came up and asked me what's up, but I wasn't able to speak, just gave them thumbs up. 2 hours later, I woke up in intensive care in the hospital. It was pretty awkward to apologize to them afterwards. Luckily, it didn't affect the party. That was certainly very thoughtful, but all I can think about is the how to end a socially awkward person meme. Just jab them at a party and make them ask for help. But seriously, glad this guy's fine and that the wedding went smoothly. Anyway, also don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Story 7. Not really my story, though I did technically see it happen since I was present, but about a year old. At my maternal aunt's wedding, my grandfather, or father, showed up, even though nobody in the family had seen him for over a decade. They debated even trying to send an invitation since they weren't sure if the address they had would still work since nobody was in contact with him. And because nobody really wanted him to show up, he didn't RSVP but arrived with his new wife, who was, if you believe my mom, younger than she was. And if you believe my dad, not that young, but still about 25 years younger than him. He spent the reception trying to convince my mom and my aunt to move with him into the Y2K bunker he was building so they'd survive the coming apocalypse, which went over about as well as you'd expect. My dad spent most of the wedding trying to manage him. Results were apparently mixed. He managed to get pretty buzzed and he stumbled out of the reception hall after trying to warn everyone that the world was coming to an end in a couple of years, and they needed to wake up. That's the last anyone in the family had contact with him. I like to think he went into the bunker on December 31st, 1999 and never came back out. Story 8. So I got married very recently. Now my husband is a good bit older than me, 15 years, and this is his second marriage, my first. As it was his second, there was a bunch of crap I didn't want to do that we were able to veto much easier because we could write it off as he and guys who were in both wedding parties have done it before, and I didn't think it needed repeating. The big one was speeches. I think they're a waste of time and most of the time overly sentimental, and no one wants to speak in front of 300 guests waiting for dinner to be served anyway. My DJ thought that was BS. I decided to announce after dinner and the cake was cut and everything was done that the mic was open to whoever wanted to say anything, even though it told him no. Dude ignored a request to ignore anyone who wanted the microphone except my dad and his best friend, who was basically my second father. They tend to get hammered at big occasions like this and want to sing hits from the 70s, which is always more hilariously terrible than cringe. So I told them it was okay. Like, they sang a hilariously warbled version of Amy at my sister's wedding around 11 p.m. when everyone was wasted because her name was Amy. Stuff like that. This resulted in a bunch of freaking randoms we don't even really know and invited because my Midwestern politeness made me talk about us, which was really talking themselves. This included my cousin's Paul Ryan light husband, who I've met a total of 2 times and my husband can't freaking stand, talking about how it's so hard to be married with an age gap and we have to be prepared since he knows firsthand. He's been married to my cousin for 8 months and he's 3 years younger than her, especially when it comes to Jewish women with morals like mine, aka I'm a big old lefty, because we're known to be difficult and less trained. And one of his coworkers talking about how impressive her kid's wedding was over hours. Thankfully, I was buzzed. Jeez, sounds like a party. Story 9. Context: this was at an otherwise reasonably classy wedding. Not over the top and not super rich, but definitely not hick or country, etc. Most attendees at the wedding were solidly upper middle class. Also, while the wedding couple were in their mid to late 20s, their families were attending the wedding and even a few dozen children were there. It's the reception, and the first co-best man gets up to do his speech. He says a few otherwise unmemorable things, doesn't appear to be overly intoxicated, not slurring his words or anything. It ends his speech with proudly, "And so I'd like to propose a toast to you, groom's name, my good friend and Eskimo brother." Most of those in the audience under 35 try to knock their glasses together while suppressing awkward grins and resisting the temptation to slap themselves on the forehead. Oh no, it gets worse. What could be worse at an otherwise classy wedding than having your first co-best man basically tell everyone in the know that he and the groom have gone with the same girl, presumably the bride? The second co-best man steps up to speak, and also doesn't appear to be overly intoxicated. He starts his speech with, "I don't know what Eskimo brothers means, so if someone could Google that for me and let me know, that would be great." Now the situation is so cringeworthy and awkward that most people under 35 have their heads buried into their hands in shared embarrassment. Another one, at my cousin's wedding. Her maid of honor was a complete and utter mess who said she wasn't going to give a speech, then drank a bunch and insisted on it. She stood up and opened up her phone to the notes section and just started reading down this list of memories and then going off on tangents and then going back to the phone and saying, "Whoops, I lost my place. Where was I?" And her stories were awful. They were about how she loved my cousin so much and hated the guy she married and how she thought he'd ruin their friendship, but she learned to tolerate him. It went on and on until one of my aunts started clinking her fork against her glass to get her to shut up. Everyone started doing it and the DJ had to come and turn off the microphone. So this girl sits down, crying, and opens her little purse and pulls out one of those giant vape pens. and takes a big pull and then just chucks a massive cloud in the face of the groom. It was amazing. Story 10. Wedding photographer here. I have a few to mention. Number 1, easily the worst, was when the father or the groom, apparently entirely sober, gave a 10-minute toast that devolved into openly complaining that his son got to be intimate with the bride and he didn't. And this wasn't a mistimed joke about how pretty she was. This was a full-on lament about growing old and how women didn't find him attractive anymore and that all he wanted was to take his daughter-in-law to bed. I got a few photos of the bride and groom reacting in horror to this, and then I went and hid with the catering staff in the kitchen, who were peeking at the door to observe the carnage. Number 2, saw a groom opening up gifts and cards during the wedding and counting the money and calling people out on how much they gave them. Also saw his friend, maybe an ex-friend now, grab the money he gave him and leave. Was awesome to see. Number 3, friend's wedding. In the middle of the vows, when they reached the through sickness and health section, the pastor started going off on his life story. He has had 3 wives and they all passed away horribly, and so it's important to really mean the through sickness bit. And at the end of the wedding, before he announced them as a couple, he asked his 4th wife to stand up. Really weird. Everyone was looking around at each other to see if it was a joke or not. Groom was pretty pissed off. Number 4, the officiant, not sure if they were a priest or whatnot, forgot to say you may be seated before going through the ceremony and exchange of vows. The crowd didn't know what to do and just kept standing through the whole ceremony. Number 5, groomsman had a little too much vodka and decided to propel himself through a tempered glass door head first. Turns out tempered glass is really hard to break. He proceeded to slide down a flight of cement stairs. As I was calling the ambulance, a bridesmaid was screaming in my face about how I was going to ruin the wedding, and how he would be just fine. As he twitched and drooled in my lap, completely sauced, concussed, and a good ounce stupider than he was 5 minutes before. We all went out for drinks after they carted him off, but the girl wouldn't let it go. How come I never get invited to weddings like these? They sound really fun. Well, if you like these stories, here's more. YouTube thinks you're gonna love this. Catch you in that video.